The diner was nearly empty at 10:30 on a Tuesday night. Loretta Vance had been on her feet since 6 that morning. 16 hours of coffee refills and plate clearing and, yes sir, coming right up. Her ankles swollen inside her white sneakers, her back carrying a low, steady ache she had stopped noticing years ago because there was no point in noticing what wasn't going to change. She was 41 years old. She had worked the late shift at the Sunrise Grill for going on 9 years, and she knew the layout of that diner the way she knew her own kitchen. Every wobble in the laminate countertop, every burned-out bulb in the dessert case nobody had gotten around to replacing. The exact spot near the window booth where the floor heaved up half an inch if the spring thaw had been wet. She had $45 left in her checking account. She had known that since the afternoon, when she'd checked her phone between a lunch rush and a birthday party that tipped 7% on a $40 tab. $45. That was what stood between her and her daughter Camille's asthma inhaler refill, which was due Thursday. She had already done the math 3 times. The math kept coming out the same. If you've ever watched someone carry a weight that nobody in the room can see, you know what Loretta looked like that night. The door opened at 10:37. She heard the small bell above it and turned from the coffee station. The man who walked in looked like he had been traveling for a very long time. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, broad through the shoulders, dressed in a plain dark jacket that had been slept in at least once. He carried one bag. He moved slowly, not from injury, but from the particular kind of exhaustion that settles into a person's bones after days of airports and car rentals and hotel rooms that all smell the same. He chose the booth farthest from the door, slid in without taking off his jacket, and sat looking at the laminated menu without reading it. Loretta picked up a glass of water and a coffee pot and walked over. "Long one," she said. He looked up at her and almost smiled. "Something like that." "Kitchen closes in 20 minutes, she said. "But we still have the full menu. Take your time." He ordered the meatloaf plate and a slice of pie and a second coffee before she'd even poured the first. She wrote it down, though she had been writing down the same orders for 9 years and didn't need to. She was not the kind of woman who stopped writing things down just because she could manage without it. What he didn't know, sitting in that booth, was that the meatloaf was the last full portion in the pan. She had been planning to take it home. Leftovers from a closing shift were a quiet courtesy the Sunrise Grill's owner, Mr. Patterson, had extended to the night staff years ago and never officially rescinded. Loretta had been counting on that meatloaf. She had not eaten since noon. She plated it without hesitating. She was that kind of woman. When a person looked the way this man looked, she didn't stop to calculate. He ate slowly and without looking up, the way people eat when they are too tired to do 2 things at once. She kept his coffee full. She brought the pie without him asking. When she set it down, he finally raised his eyes and looked at her directly for the first time. "Thank you," he said, and he meant it in a way that went past the food. "You're welcome," she said. "You need anything else, I'm right here." She left him to it. She began breaking down the counter, wiping the prep surfaces, pulling the coffee urns for cleaning. The diner was quiet enough that she could hear the rain starting up outside, tapping the broad front windows in long, diagonal streaks. She thought about the drive home. Her car had a slow leak in the right rear tire that she'd been monitoring for 6 weeks, adding air every few days at the gas station on the corner. She thought about Thursday. She thought about Camille's inhaler and the $45. She didn't think about the man in the back booth until she heard him set down his fork. He sat for a moment afterward. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out his wallet. Loretta walked over with the check. She had rung up the meatloaf and the pie and the coffees. $12.40. He looked at the check for a long time. "Ma'am," he said, "can I ask you something?" "Sure. You been on since this morning?" She looked at him. 6 a.m., she said. He nodded slowly. He looked around the near-empty diner, at the rain on the windows, at the clock above the pass-through that read 10:58. He looked back at her. "Do you own this place, or do you work it?" "I work it," she said. He nodded again. He put his hand flat on the table for a moment, as if measuring something she couldn't see. Then he reached back into his jacket. "I'd like to leave you a tip," he said. "That's kind of you," she said. What happened next, Loretta would not fully understand until the following morning. He set a folded piece of paper on top of the check. She assumed it was a 20 or maybe 2 20s. People occasionally left cash tips that felt generous and were. She was grateful for every one of them. She didn't look at it while he was still there. She walked him to the door, said goodnight, listened to the rain come in through the opening and close again behind him. Then she went back to the booth to clear the table. She picked up the folded paper. It was not a 20. It was not 2 20s. It was a check, personal, made out to Loretta Vance for $47,000. She stood there in the quiet diner with the rain against the windows and the coffee pot still warm in her other hand, and for a very long moment she did not breathe. Her first thought was that it was a mistake. Her second thought was that it was a joke. Her third thought, arriving slowly beneath the first two, was that the handwriting on the check was careful and deliberate, the kind of handwriting that does not make mistakes, and that the name printed in the upper left corner was one she had never heard, and that the amount written out in full was $47,000.00. She sat down in the booth he had left. She sat there for 4 minutes. Then she got up, finished closing the diner, drove home with the slow leak tire, and did not sleep. His name was Raymond Birch. She knew that from the check, which she had turned over and examined 7 times between midnight and 6 in the morning. She did not know who Raymond Birch was. The check was drawn on a bank she had heard of. The routing number was real. She checked it on her phone at 2 in the morning, sitting on the edge of her bed while Camille slept down the hall. In the morning she called the bank. She explained carefully that she had received a check and wanted to verify it before attempting to deposit it. The representative put her on hold for 3 minutes and came back and told her the account was valid and the funds were available. Loretta sat on her kitchen stool and looked out the window at the backyard where the grass had gone brown in the cold and her daughter's bicycle was leaning against the fence with a flat tire of its own. She thought about the $45. She thought about the man in the dark jacket who had looked at her like she was a person and not a coffee refill. She deposited the check that afternoon. It cleared the next morning. She bought Camille's inhaler first, cash, at the pharmacy 3 blocks from the school. Then she sat in her car in the pharmacy parking lot and cried for a while, not prettily, not quietly, in the way that people cry when a pressure they have been carrying for so long, it felt permanent, suddenly eases all at once. That was only the beginning of what she would come to understand. What she did not know, sitting in that parking lot, was why. What she did not know was who Raymond actually was, and what the Sunrise Grill had meant to him 32 years ago, and what a plate of meatloaf had once meant to a 16-year-old boy who had nowhere else to go. Raymond had grown up 40 minutes from that diner. He had not grown up well. His mother had left when he was 9. His father worked inconsistently and drank consistently. By 14, Raymond had learned to make himself invisible at home, to disappear for long stretches, to keep his grades high enough that the school left him alone, and his father left him alone, and the entire machinery of adult supervision passed over him without landing anywhere that might require intervention. He was a thin, quiet, watchful boy who read everything he could get his hands on and understood money in an instinctive way that he couldn't have named yet, but that would later make him very wealthy. At 16, he had a bad winter. He would not talk about the specifics of it until much later, and even then, only to 2 people. But the outline was this. His father lost a job in November and became unreachable in the particular way that some men become unreachable. And for 3 weeks in January, Raymond ate what he could manage and slept in his coat, and went to school because it was warm, and came home as late as he could. And on several of those nights he ate at the Sunrise Grill, because a waitress there had told him once, quietly, that if he ever needed a meal and didn't have the money, he should come in and order the meatloaf plate, and she would take care of the rest. Her name was Dottie. She had worked the late shift at the Sunrise Grill for 11 years. She had wide hands and a no-nonsense manner, and she had seen Raymond in the diner enough times to know that something was wrong, and she was the kind of woman who acted on what she knew. She fed him meatloaf 5 times that January. She never mentioned it to anyone. She never asked him to explain. She set the plate down the same way she set every plate down, and when he tried to tell her he'd bring the money when he had it, she waved her hand and said, "You just come back and eat when you're hungry," and went back to her other tables. Raymond finished high school. He got a scholarship. He built things. He took apart the instinctive understanding he had always had about money and rebuilt it into something he could use, and over the next 30 years, he used it with a patience and a precision that quietly accumulated into a great deal. He did not talk about his childhood in interviews. He did not trade on the rags and riches framework because it felt private to him in a way that could not be explained in a business profile. What he carried instead was a specific memory. A plate of meatloaf under fluorescent light in a quiet diner on a cold January night, set down by a woman who didn't ask him to earn it. He went back to that diner every few years. He had looked for Dottie and learned on his third visit that she had retired and moved to be near her daughter in another state. He had asked the manager for her last name and a forwarding address. The manager said he didn't have one. Raymond had left his card and asked that if anyone knew how to reach her, they let her know he'd been asking. Nobody ever called. He went back to the Sunrise Grill on a Tuesday in March because he was passing through on a long drive between two obligations, and because that diner was the only place in his life that had remained completely unchanged while everything else had shifted around it. The same laminate countertop. The same dessert case with the burned-out bulb. The same floor heaved near the window booth. He had walked in like he always did, worn out in a way that no amount of money had ever fully solved, and a woman had brought him water and coffee and looked at him like he was a person, not a resource. He had watched her work for an hour. He had done this before, in the abstract, with people whose lives he thought might benefit from what he had. It was not a regular habit. It was not charity in the way the word usually sat. It was closer to a debt he could never fully discharge because the person who was owed was no longer findable. And so he did what he could, which was to pay attention and to act when something in the room told him to. The room told him to. He knew the meatloaf was the last portion. He had seen her write it up. He had seen the way she moved through the closing diner, the economy of someone working without a margin for error. He had seen her check her phone once, quickly, between clearing two tables, and press her lips together the way people do when a number they are reading is a number they didn't want. He did not know her daughter's name was Camille. He did not know about the inhaler. He did not know about the $45. He knew what he had known at 16. A person who feeds a stranger without being asked is performing an act that deserves to be remembered. He left her a check and walked out into the rain. Now, what Loretta did not do once the check cleared was nothing. She was not a woman who sat on money she didn't understand and waited for it to make sense. She was a woman who had been managing $45 cushions for long enough that $47,000 felt in those first days less like wealth than like a held breath she was afraid to let out all at once. She bought the inhaler. She paid the 3 months of credit card interest she had been carrying. She bought Camille a winter coat that actually fit because Camille had been wearing the same coat for 2 winters, and the zipper had started catching in October, and Loretta had been fixing it with a safety pin. And then she sat down with a piece of paper and did what she always did when she had a number in front of her, which was to think carefully about what it could do. What it could do, she learned after 2 conversations with a housing counsellor at the Community Development Office on 5th Street, was pay off the remaining balance on her house. Loretta had bought the house 11 years ago, a 2-bedroom on a quiet block, with a down payment she had saved over 4 years of double shifts. She had a mortgage at a rate that had been reasonable in the year she signed it. Over 11 years, she had made every payment. She had been late twice, both times by fewer than 10 days, both times during stretches when Camille's medical costs had outpaced her planning. The balance remaining on the loan was $44,000 and some dollars. She called her mortgage servicer on a Thursday morning. She sat at her kitchen table with Camille at school and the backyard visible through the window, the brown grass and the bicycle with the flat tire, and she told the representative on the phone that she wanted to make a payoff. The representative explained the process. She confirmed the figures. She noted the date and the amount. Loretta wrote down the exact number. She had always written things down. She wired the funds that afternoon. The confirmation came the next morning, a single sentence from the mortgage servicer informing her that the loan had been paid in full and the lien on the property would be released. She would receive the recorded release by mail within 30 days. She read the sentence 3 times, then she put the phone face down on the kitchen table and sat very still for a moment. Outside, the neighbour's dog was barking at something in the alley. The refrigerator made its usual sound. The house was quiet in the way a house is quiet when the only person in it has just become the sole owner of every wall, every floor, every window, every creaking stair. She picked the phone back up and called her sister, Denise. Denise cried before Loretta finished explaining. "He just left a check," Denise said. "He just left a check." "A stranger, a tired man who needed meatloaf," Loretta said. There was a long pause from Denise's end. "Lo," Denise said, "I've been telling you for years." "Telling me what?" "That you were going to get yours. I have been telling you. You never believe me." Loretta looked out the window at the flat, tired bicycle and the brown winter grass. "I believe you now," she said. She went back to work the following Tuesday. She had taken 4 days, which felt to her like a long time, even though anyone else might have taken more. She put on her white sneakers and her apron, and she poured coffee, and she cleared plates, and she told exactly no one at the Sunrise Grill what had happened, because it wasn't the kind of story she knew how to tell in the middle of a shift, and because she needed the job and intended to keep it for a while longer. There were other things she was thinking about. A savings account for Camille's college, which was 7 years off. A car that did not have a slow leak. A new lock for the front door that had been sticking since the summer. She thought about these things steadily, the way she thought about everything while she worked. She thought about Raymond, too. She thought about him in the quiet moments between tables, during the 10 minutes of stillness that settled over the late shift after the last customer left, and before she started breaking down the counter. She thought about what it meant to be seen by someone you would never see coming. She thought about Dottie, whose name she had learned from Mr. Patterson when she'd asked, because something about the way Raymond had sat in that booth had made her want to understand. Mr. Patterson had told her about Dottie. He told her Dottie used to do the same thing, quiet, with kids who needed it, and that he had looked the other way because Dottie always squared the books at the end of the month in ways he couldn't quite account for, and never tried to. Loretta had stood there in the kitchen doorway listening to this, and something had moved through her that she didn't have a word for. Not exactly surprise, more like recognition. Like a piece of a story she hadn't known she was in, suddenly showing her where it had started. Dottie had fed a boy. The boy had grown up and kept coming back. He had sat in her section 30 years later without knowing it was her section, and he had paid attention the way Dottie had taught him to pay attention, and he had acted. He had. Loretta had been in the middle of it without knowing she was in the middle of anything. She had been doing what she always did. She had given what she had because it was the right thing to do. She had not calculated. She had not kept score. That was the thing she understood now, sitting in the quiet diner after closing. That was the entire thing. You didn't give because you were tracking what you get back. You gave because the person in front of you needed it, and you had it to give. You gave because Dottie had given, and somewhere in the long thread of that, you became the reason someone else could give, and on down the line, in ways you would never trace and might not live to see. She was not a woman who made speeches, even to herself. She finished wiping the counter. She pulled the coffee urns. She got her coat from the back and put it on. She drove home. The right rear tyre was new. She had replaced it 2 weeks ago, the day after the check cleared, at the tyre place on Morse Avenue, where the mechanic had quoted her straight and never talked down to her. The car rode smooth and quiet in the dark, and she noticed the difference the way you notice the absence of a sound you have been hearing so long you'd forgotten it was there. Camille was asleep when she came in. Loretta checked on her from the doorway the way she had checked on her every night since Camille was 3 weeks old. Her daughter was 12 now, and slept with her arm thrown over her face and her hair spread across the pillow in a way that was both familiar and quietly astonishing. She breathed without effort. Her chest rose and fell, steady and even. The inhaler sat on the nightstand, full. Loretta stood there in the doorway for a long moment, then she went to her own room and sat on the edge of her bed in the dark and thought about the house around her. The walls, the floors, the windows with the rain coming again now, tapping lightly. All of it hers. No lien, no balance, no number somewhere in the ledger of her life representing what she still owed. She thought about Raymond, who was somewhere else tonight, in another city, in another hotel room that smelled like every other hotel room. She did not have a way to thank him and would not have known how to begin, even if she had. He had not given her his card. He had not left a note. He had left a check with nothing attached to it, which was its own kind of message. It meant simply this. This is yours. No conditions. No performance required. You had already earned it. She lay down. She pulled the blanket up. Outside, the rain came steadily against the window and the house held still around her, the way it always had, the way it would from now on. And Loretta, who had been carrying a weight for so long that she had stopped noticing it as weight, let her eyes close and slept the kind of sleep that comes when a thing you have been waiting to exhale, finally, quietly, leaves you. The release of Leon came in the mail on a Thursday 28 days later, in a plain white envelope from the county recorder's office. Loretta opened it at the kitchen table while Camille ate toast before school. "What is it?" Camille asked. Loretta looked at the document, at the legal description of the property, which was their house, their address, their street, at the stamped and recorded notation that no lien or encumbrance remained on the title, at the date. "It's a piece of paper that says this house is ours," she said. Camille chewed her toast. "Wasn't it already ours?" "Now it's really ours," Loretta said. Camille appeared to consider this. "Okay," she said, and drank her orange juice. Loretta folded the document and set it back in the envelope and held it for a moment in both hands before setting it on the table. It was a single sheet of paper. It was lighter than it ought to have been, for everything it said. That had always been the thing about the most important moments. They rarely announced themselves with appropriate weight. A man walking into a diner on a Tuesday night, a plate of meatloaf slid across a counter. A boy fed because a woman with wide hands and good sense decided that was what you did. The world kept a ledger that no one could read in full. Kindness entered it silently. It accrued without the giver's knowledge, without any expectation of a return, and it waited in the account the way money waits, patient and gathering until the day it was needed most. Loretta tucked the envelope into the stack of important papers she kept in the drawer under the kitchen counter, between Camille's birth certificate and the car insurance documents. Then she got up and started making Camille's lunch. Have you ever done something quietly for someone who needed it without expecting anything in return? Tell us in the comments, and then go check out the story of the nurse who worked 4 years of overtime to pay for a stranger's surgery. She had no idea what was waiting for her when she finished. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment and inspiration. Names, characters, and events are entirely fictional. There had been a spring 3 years before when Loretta had nearly left the Sunrise Grill. It was not the hours she had long since accepted. 16-hour days in a good week, 14 on a slow one, her feet carrying her from booth to counter to kitchen, passed through in a loop she could have walked blindfolded. She had built a body that tolerated it, a back that complained in a specific register she had learned to ignore, ankles that she wrapped with a compression sleeve she bought in 3-packs from the Dollar Pharmacy on Central and replaced when they lost their give. The physical cost of the work was just the work. She had no argument with it. What had nearly broken her that spring was a manager. His name was Dennis, and he had come in as an assistant manager in February and been given a key and a clipboard and an attitude that arrived ahead of him into any room he entered. He was 27 years old. He had a business degree from a school she hadn't heard of and a manner that communicated consistently and without apology that he considered the waitstaff a problem he had been hired to manage rather than people he had been hired to work with. He had told Loretta in March of that year in front of 2 other staff members that her customer interaction times were too long and that she was getting chatty with tables in a way that hurt turnover. She had looked at him steadily and said, "The customers come back because of how I treat them." "They come back for the food," he said. She had not responded to that. She had gone back to her section and she had treated every customer at every table exactly the way she always had. And every one of her tables had tipped above the house average, and 2 of them had asked specifically for her the next time they came in, which was what always happened. And Dennis had moved on within 4 months to a chain place across town that presumably needed his particular skills in a way that the Sunrise Grill did not. For those 4 months, she had been grinding. She had been coming home at midnight with her jaw tight and her chest carrying a low, compressed anger that she didn't fully release until she was in the shower with the door closed and Camille asleep. And even then, she had to work at it. She had thought about quitting. She had done the math on what she would need to make it a different job to keep the mortgage current, and the math had come out worse than staying, so she had stayed. She had told Denise about Dennis once, briefly, over the phone. Denise had offered opinions that were colourful and largely accurate. "Lo," Denise had said, "you are too good for anyone who talks to you like that." "Too good doesn't keep the lights on," Loretta had said. "It does, eventually," Denise had said. She had not believed it at the time. She had believed it the way you believe a thing you wish were true, which is to say, not really, not in the part of you that counts the money in the account and calibrates the distance between what you have and what you need. That distance had been, for most of her adult life, something she had managed by working harder, asking for nothing she hadn't earned, and doing her job so well that no one with the authority to fire her ever had a serious reason to try. She had worked at the Sunrise Grill for 9 years. She knew every regular. She knew the college kids who came in on Sunday mornings looking like they regretted Saturday, and the retired couple who split a piece of pie on Wednesday afternoons, and the night shift nurses from the hospital on Clement who came in at 11:30 in their scrubs and ordered the same things every time. She knew which booths ran cold in winter because the seal on the window had gone soft, and she knew the exact tone of Mr. Patterson's voice when he was considering a new item for the menu versus when he was just thinking out loud about it. She was the Sunrise Grill in a way that no assistant manager with a clipboard could measure. She had never thought of it in those terms. She thought about what was in front of her: the customer, the coffee, the order, the check, the bus, the house, the inhaler, Camille. The immediate and the necessary. She was not a woman who spent much time on her own worth in the abstract because worth in the abstract did not pay the credit card. And then a tired man walked in at 10:37 on a Tuesday night and paid attention. Not to her performance, not to her speed, not to her customer interaction time or her turnover rate. He had watched the way she moved through the diner, and he had seen a person carrying something without complaint. And he had been the kind of man who remembered what that looked like from the inside. That was all it was. He saw her. He remembered. He acted. She thought about this a great deal in the weeks that followed, in those quiet moments after closing when the diner was as still as it ever got. She thought about what it meant to be seen by someone who was looking. She was not a woman given to large philosophizing, but she understood something clearly. You could do a thing faithfully and correctly for 9 years and it could sit unnoticed in the world like a tree in a field no one drove past. And then, one night, someone drove past. And the tree had been there the whole time. The tree was not new. The tree had not grown suddenly. The seeing was what was new. She thought about Camille, who was 12 and who had her father's stubbornness and her mother's way of watching a room before she decided to trust it. Camille was careful and observant, and she already had opinions about things that Loretta found startling in their clarity. She wanted to be a doctor. Had wanted this since she was 9, with a specificity that Loretta took seriously even as she privately wondered how to build a bridge between the wanting and the actual cost of medical school, which was an ocean you would need more than one boat to cross. She thought about the money differently now. Not the $47,000, which was gone and correctly gone, dispatched to its best purpose. She thought about the next thing. The savings account she had opened the week after the check cleared, into which she had been depositing $150 from every paycheck, because $150 per paycheck, reliably, across the years between now and Camille's 18th birthday, became something. Not enough. Not the ocean, but a start, and a start was what you worked from. She had also quietly looked up a GED prep program at the community college on the other side of town. Not for herself. Camille asked questions about things Loretta sometimes could not answer, and she wanted to be able to answer them, or at least to understand where to go to find the answers. She was not sure this was the right program. She was still looking. She was, in other words, doing exactly what she had always done. One thing, then the next thing, then the thing after that. Not because she had a plan in the grand sense, but because she was the kind of person who looked at what was possible and then worked toward it. Daily, without performance, without announcing it to anyone. That was who she had been before Raymond walked in. That was who she was after. What was different was the house. The house was hers in a way it had not been before. Not legally, not technically, but in the felt weight of a night. She came home now, and the door opened into a space that belonged to her without condition. No balance. No counter-ticking somewhere in a computer in another city against everything she had built. She paid property taxes and utilities and the usual frictions of ownership, and she was not naive about those, but they were a different category of obligation from a mortgage. They were the cost of having rather than the cost of almost having. She had not understood how much of her sleep had been taken by the almost having until it was gone. She slept differently. She had noticed this within the first week and confirmed it over the first month. She went to sleep more quickly and woke up less often, and the hour between 4 and 5 in the morning, which had been for years the hour when the worst kind of arithmetic presented itself behind her closed eyes, had gone quiet. Camille noticed too, in the way children notice changes in the register of a household without having the vocabulary to name them. "You seem less tired," Camille said one morning over breakfast. I am less tired, Loretta said. Did something change? Loretta looked at her daughter. At the face she had been looking at for 12 years, careful and watchful, and already too much in the business of measuring the room. Yeah, she said. Something changed. She did not explain further, and Camille, who was her mother's daughter, did not push. She finished her toast and got her backpack and went to school, and Loretta sat at the kitchen table in the quiet house on the quiet street that was entirely hers, and drank her coffee and thought about the day. Not about the debt, not about the $45, not about the math between what she had and what she needed, which had been the background music of every morning for so long she had ceased to hear it as music and simply heard it as the sound of being awake. She thought about Camille's science project, which was due in 2 weeks and involved a poster about the circulatory system that Loretta had promised to help with. She thought about whether the leftover soup in the refrigerator was still good or had crossed the line into caution. She thought about a woman at table 6 last night who had tipped 30% on a $60 tab and left a note on the receipt that said simply, "Thank you for making it nice." She thought about all the ordinary things that made up a life when the weight underneath them had been removed. She got up. She washed her cup. She got ready for work. This was what it looked like, she understood. This was what Denise had always been talking about, imprecisely but truly. Not a dramatic reversal. Not a public vindication. Just one morning you wake up in a house that is yours and you wash your cup and you go to work. And the space between those two things is, for the first time, clean. She had carried a weight for a long time. She had carried it without complaint and without putting it down. She had done her job faithfully and given what she had to give and asked for nothing that she hadn't earned. And now the weight was gone. She did not take this as a sign that the universe was just in a simple way. She was not naive enough for that, and she had seen too much to believe that every plate of meatloaf came back as a house. She knew the math did not work out evenly for most people. She knew the Dottie of the story had retired to another state and never gotten her check. She knew something else too, something she had carried out of that diner on the night she found the folded paper in the booth. Doing the right thing when you didn't have to was not wasted, even when it seemed to vanish into the ordinary flow of a closing shift. It went somewhere. It became part of the fabric of the world, invisible and permanent. And sometimes, on a rain-soaked Tuesday night, it came back to you in a plain white envelope and paid off the house. She tied her apron. She picked up the coffee pot. She went to work. There was one more thing she did in the weeks that followed. She started leaving bigger tips herself, not dramatically bigger. She was not a woman who performed gestures. She was still working the same shifts, still depositing her paychecks, still managing her budget the way she had always managed it, one line item at a time. She was not suddenly flush. She had paid off the house and established the savings account and replaced the tyre, and what remained was exactly what had always remained. A life lived carefully, without slack. When she ate out on her days off, which she did occasionally with Denise, or sometimes alone, after a morning errand, she tipped the full amount that the work deserved. Not a percentage that made her feel responsible, the amount that made her feel like she had paid what was actually owed. She thought about why she was doing this once, in an honest moment. She knew it was not going to circle back to her. She knew the math didn't work that way, that the world's ledger was not a literal account. She was not putting in deposits expecting a return on kindness. That was not how she had ever operated. She did it because she knew, now in a way she had always suspected, that the person on the other side of the table was carrying something she couldn't see, that they had woken up that morning with a number in their head, that they were hoping the shift would improve, that they were tired in a way they weren't going to mention because there was no point in mentioning it. She did it because it was the right thing to do. She had always known this. She had just been too close to her own arithmetic to remember it clearly. She remembered it now.